Right, hi everyone, and welcome to the final episode this year of our Road to Recovery series, our series of commentaries on the COVID crisis and the aftermath, in which every month we've been talking to business leaders and thought leaders to share what the pandemic has taught us and indeed is teaching us, and to think together with our listeners about what this means for the future of HR, finance, technology, and indeed work generally. So welcome. I'm Tom Holmes, founding director of Veran Performance, technology agnostic consultancy that helps businesses to solve their HR and finance problems and bring digital transformation to the back office. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Chloe Lewis, ex-HRD of Sainsbury's and now UK and Ireland client director of Alight, to talk to us about the digital journey the retail industry has encountered and the parallels between customer and colleague activities. So customer being obviously Sainsbury's and retail's focused, colleagues more of what we get up to in HR, finance and other back office stuff. So good morning, Chloe.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Tom. And first, I'd just like to say thank you very much for inviting me to come along. It's fab to be here and great to talk to you.
Great. So before we get started, do you want to tell us a bit about who you are, what your role was at Sainsbury's and what your role now is at Alight, actually, Chloe?
Yeah, no, that would be great. So as you say, Chloe, I live tucked away in the West Country. I've been in HR all of my career, too many years to probably mention now, actually, so I won't share, but certainly plus 20. I've worked across 3 different sectors in the FTSE 100s, and my last role before joining Alight was, as you said, at Sainsbury's. So I had a big chunk of the retail business across the whole of the north. That was around 450 stores, about 45,000 colleagues across supers, convenience, Argos. I had a massive patch, actually. I had from kind of Yorkshire, all the way to Cheshire, right up to Scotland. I had Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland. So the pandemic was very interesting when I had different nations doing different things, but we'll talk a bit about that. But certainly massive geographical leadership role in Sainsbury's. As well as that, I had customer experience. So my managing director was also the customer experience director for Sainsbury's. So I was the HRD for that part of the business and worked with her and the team on a new service proposition at Sainsbury's, which was excellent. So you probably picked up a daily commute from the West Country to the North is not actually that doable. So unfortunately, with my personal choice to move home, I've been chasing my career around the world for 20 odd years, and I made the decision this year to move back home to my family. So I moved back to Cornwall. I'm very blessed to live half an hour from the beach. So certainly a different way of life, but it wasn't obviously conducive with my role, and took the opportunity to take a look and think, what is it I want to do now? I've been a HRD for a number of years, and I've been in, as I say, lots of different sectors. So the Alight role was a really exciting opportunity to actually take all my HRD experience and go and work with businesses to help them on their digital transformation. So really exciting time. And that's what I do with our UK customers. So yeah, thank you for having me.
That's great, Chloe. And that's exactly the experience we want to tap into, your experience of retail and all those sectors, because it's now Christmas time. And obviously it's the most exciting time, and it's supposed to be the busiest time in retail. And I have to say, I don't know much about retail and all that stuff, but you call it the golden quarter, and I imagine it's even more important this year than previous years. And I guess it's been somewhat curtailed, but could you tell us a bit about the situation, Chloe?
Yeah, of course I can, absolutely. I mean, God, Tom, without a shadow, it is the most amazing time of the year to work in retail, and anyone who works in retail does, because they just love Christmas. But don't get me wrong, you get to Christmas Eve and I think you then sleep for most of Christmas Day, because it is actually really, really, it's a full on time of year. And the buzz and passion that comes from it, from our colleagues in delivering for our customers is just even more heightened at Christmas. And actually, it's called the golden quarter for a reason. Retailers make or break in this quarter, and therefore the pressure that goes to get that right is quite extraordinary. And even more so we've seen in the last couple of years with the pandemic. And I think the most prevalent thing you feel in retail, and everyone talks about it being a different pace to anything you've worked in, and until you experience it, you don't really understand why that is. But the retailers will know within 7 days of Christmas how they've performed, how they've performed against their competitors, their plan and strategy they set out, the performance of the business, and it will influence really key strategic decisions going straight into January, into the new year. The retail sector start planning their Christmas in January. They will analyze how they performed. They'll lock and load a plan by June. Our store teams will have to be ready for Christmas and setting their plans out by September. So Christmas is an all year round thing for retailers, but the actual delivery of it is what happens in the actual Christmas period. And if you think about back to 12 months ago, we had those announcements, didn't we? Christmas was not going to happen, and something like that can so materially impact a retailer, especially a food retailer. And we saw immediately things like the big turkeys, the big meals, they weren't going to sell through. So how we had to respond to and have the right supply for our customers, whether really strange things you learn when you work in retail. Everybody bought more lamb and beef. Really funny stat, 52% more sales in premium champagne. So whilst everybody was hacked off last year as well, they all decided to trade up and we sport ourselves more, didn't we, through the year we'd had. And so the scale of that, and I don't think you can really understand it till you work in it. Sainsbury's has 2,000 stores. We serve 35 million customers a week. That's out of Christmas week. 180,000 colleagues serving retail colleagues. So Christmas we would have to recruit 22,000 colleagues to just deliver that. We'd have 3,000 more online delivery drivers. The scale of it is so significant. So the build up and the pressure, and therefore the delivery, is like nothing you ever in any sector you work in. And
I guess this year that we've so last year it was all on and then it became off in the last few days. This year is a bit more of a confused picture where everything was on, the large turkeys and stuff like that, and it still is, although we're all acting with a bit more caution than was expected, say, even a week ago.
I think this week there's two big things that will be affecting retail right now, and I was thinking about my colleagues last night. Absence will be immediately hitting the retailers. So you can't have 250,000 employees without feeling the immediate impact. And quite often in the north, we felt this sooner than any other part of the business because of the demographic in some of our populations in the north. And so the absence level, when you're already under resourced to deliver a really challenging, a few days of supply to customers, that those 4 days running up to Christmas, is the customer numbers are so significantly differently to any time of the year. So absence will be a massive issue right now, I think, on the minds of retailers. And also I suspect, and I haven't spoken to any of my ex-colleagues, that people will be, the calories will be even more at home, and the groups might reduce in size. There was a really strong message from the science team last night. The science officer wasn't there, around don't mix with people unless you have to. And I think that will drive a behavior into retail straight away. They will feel it immediately, for sure, as they have everything with the pandemic in reality.
Yes, yeah. I mean, although in this case the rules are the guide. We've been given guidance, but not instruction, I think is the way of describing it. But we're so used to following that guidance and thinking ahead of it that I imagine it has got an impact. Anyway, let's not let that put us off.
We could talk about Boris next, couldn't we?
Tell me more about how the characteristics of retail have changed through the pandemic. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really fab question, and one when I look back 2 years ago, you'd never think you'd experience some of what we have in the industry. And certainly I went through the financial crisis, and whilst there was real similarities, the biggest thing by far was around keeping our customers and colleagues safe. If you think about it, there was a time, and I was reflecting on it yesterday, where the only place we went other than a walk for an hour was a supermarket, wasn't it? So it really was the front and center of a crisis. So there's so many things that came from that. And in amidst the pandemic, and people probably won't see all of this, there's been so much other stuff that's happening in the retail industry. Brexit has had a massive impact, the supply and all of those things the retailers are currently grappling with. But the actual pandemic itself, if I think back to is my signal all right? Can you still? Yeah, good. Your camera had frozen. If I think back to the start of the pandemic itself, and this is, I think, a thread that's gone throughout all of it, is the scale of which the change is driven through the business. And Sainsbury's like no other business, and it'd be great if we had other retailers part of this that could comment. We had to listen to the announcements at the same time as the nation. The board were listening to that and then translate that into business strategic decisions. So the pace and agility of organizations to make decisions and act on it is definitely something that's been prevalent.
Indeed, but I've kind of noticed that there's a different kind of sense of purpose. You mentioned that a lot of retailers were the only contact we had, and with people outside of our families during a long part of the period, and I could see that that there was a change in the way they were thinking and dealing with their customers, a real sense of purpose.
Yeah, undoubtedly, I think it's one of the biggest themes that I've picked out of the time, the unparalleled sense of purpose, actually. And some of the things that our colleagues did day to day before the pandemic. Most of our stores, Sainsbury's in particular, has got a real cadre of more elderly customers. Our colleagues would day to day know those customers, they and would care for them. That happened at a scale of everybody across the nation, and little moments that we had where we prioritized elderly customers to come in first thing in the morning, standing and talking to those customers. I was at a particular store one morning, and I had an 83-year-old female crying because she was so worried. So 100%, and I think before the pandemic, people were quite snobby about retailers. It wasn't a career for choice. It wasn't somewhere that you go for a career. And actually, when people saw, I think we all saw the purpose that they had for us during that pandemic, it made people feel very proud of how they were serving our customers. So as a colleague myself, as a customer, but also as a leader of a retail business, being able to understand what our colleagues felt, tap into that. Listening was so important. Sainsbury's made all their decisions based on the values that we had. So listening to what our colleagues were saying, how they felt, what was important to them, and responding on the back of that. I mean, we've seen so many studies, haven't we, about how you can have exemplary performance based on higher engaged colleagues for a sense of purpose. And everybody felt the whole nation behind them in that time. And the Feeding the Nation, obviously the campaign, the pride that our colleagues felt, and to be able to reward that and recognize it that we did, because ultimately, it's not easy as well. It's hard. There was people that were still frustrated, angry, didn't want to wear masks, so our colleagues get a lot of abuse all the time, but they had this bigger sense that they were doing something that they've never done before, and it corralled everybody behind the organization. And certainly the pride that people felt was the commitment was exceptional.
And in the main, what I observed was a greater level of respect and understanding from customers to staff. in the main. I mean, as you say, there are people who they want to wear masks and do all that kind of stuff, and difficult customers who are under stress. But at the same time, in general, I saw a greater sympathy and appreciation for retail staff, because, as you say, it was the only people we saw.
Yeah, and also, you know, we were out effectively. You couldn't ever believe you'd say this, but on the front line, that really did put a lot of pressure on our colleagues. You know, let's not shy away from this. The first 2 or 3 months, our store manager and leadership teams, their focus was just, they were like counselors. They were constantly trying to, make sure people were okay. So actually it felt very frontline. There was heightened levels of anxiety. Well-being became very, very important. And therefore their safety and how they felt was what led the business. And I think when you get colleagues that feel listened to and respected, it just gives them a greater sense of purpose, I feel.
Yes. And what kind of innovation and change did this bring, Chloe?
Well, I think what it did more than anything was the consumer behavior drove innovation and change. You know, our behavior overnight as consumers changed. If you think back pre-pandemic, we were all, quite, we shopped frequently, we did things very differently. You know, that changed overnight, and the retailers had to respond to that. So we have much less transactions and bigger baskets again. Big events became much more important. You know, the big staycation, the cooking. I mean, you and I have talked about this, Tom. It's reinvigorated the cooking from scratch passion that people had lost because life just was too busy. So how retailers had to respond quickly to a desire from us as a nation to do things differently was what drove the need to innovate and change.
That's really interesting. So is that why the ready meals corridors have kind of reduced, and I'm seeing a lot more kind of baking and stuff like that materials?
Do you know what the biggest growth in product Sainsbury's had last Christmas was mincemeat in jars, because people wanted to make their own mince pies. So there's been a real change in people's feelings about scratch cooking, and also from that a bigger picture again. With the pandemic has driven us all to think differently about our impact on the world, hasn't it? So plant-based products, 30% of food produced is wasted, and I think people are much more mindful of that now with the greenhouse emissions they have, and eating well and how they can eat well. So retailers had to really think quickly about how they were going to respond to that, because the competition is so fierce in retail, and we are, as a nation, quite we're not sticky when it comes to retailers. There's a lot of people that will move around, and I think it's fair to say retailers lost their way a little bit in the last few years. And certainly from Sainsbury's perspective, when the Asda merger didn't happen and we went into a new CEO in June, this is all in the middle of the pandemic, the new CEO, the thing that our CEO kicked off was a strategic review. And he was really clear that we needed to make some bold decisions, really bold decisions. And one of those was, and very much driven by the pandemic, was putting food back at the heart of the business. That was what was important to driving the success of the business. And if you go back 150 years, which some people won't know this, but the founders of Sainsbury's, their whole purpose was around bringing food at affordable prices to people who couldn't even get food at that point. So actually really anchoring back to what Sainsbury's was about, putting food first and innovating. But what that really does mean, though, is it's about, to innovate, you have to focus on cost, your ability to reduce costs and transform the cost base. And that was the center of the program. And we therefore launched a massive innovation program called Save to Invest, all to innovate in food, because you win in food, you win everywhere else in a supermarket. Right. And Sainsbury's had lost its way, and as I think had retailers a little bit. So So the need to transform the business to focus on what our consumers were telling us was most important to them was what definitely came out as a big trend from the pandemic. And I can't communicate well enough the scale of that change. So what did the pandemic? Things that happened. We shut all our Argos stores, yet traded bigger value through the pandemic. Now everybody was pushed online, get that completely, but we created click and collect sites, store in stores. We transformed, and what that ability to test that model showed us was there was a huge opportunity to transform our Argos model into a fulfillment model. That meant, and we announced this in the middle of the pandemic, which again, you wouldn't think you drive such significant change, but Argos is going to be left with only 100 stores and be much more led through a store-in-store program in Sainsbury's and a fulfillment model. So it has to do that to the brand, to keep that iconic brand. I mean, do you know it's the third biggest website visited in the UK, Argos, but it had to be different to come out of what was a.
So tell me, what is a fulfillment model in this context? Because you need to help me a bit with language. What is
Amazon?
Right.
So Sainsbury's will open 32 massive, huge fulfillment centres, which will go direct, because we know consumers want to shop online. That will go direct to our homes. If they can't, they can then get it through a standalone store or a store in store. So it's a lower cost model that like Amazon has, which goes direct from warehouse to consumer.
I see. So it's a combination of direct delivery, click and collect, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But the pandemic helped us test how our consumers would respond to that. Now, what I was reading last week, a global consumer report, whilst the digital transformation will remain, and actually Sainsbury's customers, food is one of the even though it's 128% year-on-year growth in online food ordering, it's not got the same growth as something like Argos has. So the Sainsbury's and the retailer has to make sure the decision on the strategy is consumer led and what the behavior will be.
So what do these changes mean for HR and back office?
Yeah, so it's a really great question. I think if I look back over the 12 or the last 3 years, but the pandemic, it's never been as I think dynamic in a HR function as it has been. So not only have we had to deal with a pandemic, which is people centric, isn't it, in every which way you look at, had to support a business drive transformational change to survive and come out of the pandemic fitter, but also transform itself. And every part of the business has been touched in a need to transform, and HR is not alone in that. So how HR becomes more efficient and effective to support the business has been absolutely at the heart of it. And I think as a consequence, the HR functions have got to drive their digital innovation in the same way through their strategy as the business has. And we're seeing that transformation across many industries and all functions, aren't we?
So what are those? What do you think the long-lasting impacts of the pandemic are going to be?
I think for the retail sector, I think it will be unparalleled innovation and change in the business by far. The need to respond. No area will be left unchanged at the end of it. If I take even every part of front back office everywhere, if you take the logistics business, that through the need to drive innovation and cost reduction, that that the logistics function will be transformed. Every part of the business will be impacted from this. And I think by far making bold decisions, that I think that's what it taught. I mean, Sainsbury's made more change in 18 months than it had in 10 years. And I think it showed people that acting fast, making pacey decisions. And one of the things the new CEO did was a culture review, led by the HR director, actually, and Angie. And it was about how do we deliver the strategy? And they recognized the culture was the most important. And the biggest thing that came through that was the need to increase the pace in the business. And that's where it's already pacey. So decisions being made and executing. So bold decisions, quick delivery, and even more innovation and change, I think, is what the lasting impact for retail.
Okay, because you see, what I see in retail and what I kind of think about is that there's been enormous work and change on kind of customer experience, the responsiveness to changes in customer demands, even in the last few weeks, couple of years, etc., which you described very eloquently. But drawing that same switch to a more digitalized, a more fulfillment model, but in the HR and colleague experience. Yeah. How's that coming on, Chloe, and where do you think that's going?
Yeah, so again, it's a big question for HR functions, isn't it? And you're right, Tom. Digital innovation is at the heart of any business now, isn't it? It has to be to deliver the growth that it wants. And I talked about the online growth, but if you take a step back and think about, if you take Sainsbury's as a business, 3 years ago it had Sainsbury's, Argos, Habitat, all separate customer digital experiences. And yes, moving forward to being able to have one customer experience through that and serve all customers in any way they want, has been at the heart of the strategy. And there's so many key digital innovations that are enablers to that, whether it's the Nectar, so I don't know whether people would have seen or heard it, go and have a look, but Sainsbury's have just launched their first pick and go store in London. So you walk in, you've got your Nectar app, your phone, you do your own shopping, you walk out the door and it debits you. This is digital, is the future of retail. So it's the pace and investment around consumer innovation is exponential, and we will continue to see that. And I think the colleague investment is way lagging behind in the same way. Okay. Now, you can say that that's right, because customer is king. We've got to get keep the revenue and grow our customer. But equally, if I think about an organization the size of any of our big retailers, you get the colleague stuff wrong, and the bottom line impact that has through absence or attrition, or not recruiting the right, in the war for talent, we are not getting the right people through the right recruitment system, the onboarding being not right because the technology isn't good enough. All those things materially impact an organization's cost base. And therefore I personally feel that a big focus for any HR function needs to be how they're delivering their people agenda through digital transformation.
Well, it's very interesting, because I have noticed and heard that a lot of retailers, a lot of hospitality in particular, their constraints are not providing excellent service to their customers anymore, but actually keeping, training, and having sufficient colleagues to deliver that service. Because one of the other characteristics is people are moving sectors. The less attractive, the less easy places to work are losing colleagues quickly.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we did see a big influx of talent through the pandemic, because retailers were obviously one of the biggest recruiting, and I met many people, and there was a lot of people that decided to keep retail as their came out of the entertainment sector, the restaurants and such like. So it's definitely been a thread. I think maybe retailers might have been less impacted, but if I think about certainly my last 18 months and the creation of the new service proposition, and I know all retailers are doing the similar things, the same discussion wasn't given to the colleague experience as it was to the customer, and therefore, it just, whether it has had the same boardroom impact yet. I mean, the last 6 months we have seen, and anything you Google now, that there's such big people related issues hitting boardrooms, aren't they? That there has to be a seismic change, and we hear that in the Great Resignation in the US and all these things. But I think up until this point, it has been left behind. It's not had the same focus.
I think that's true. I imagine in many of these, the slick service which retailers provide their customers is not always reflected in the way they deal with their colleagues. So I imagine that, for example, at Sainsbury's, buying your weekly shop is probably easier than if you're a colleague booking your holiday or changing your shift rotation.
There's so many different stories I could tell you, Tom, which I won't do, but yeah, definitely. Big organizations with high volumes of colleagues, and I've had this in every sector I've worked in, whether that's been financial services through to BAE system. The technology is an enabler, but it's not always the endpoint, and pain points still exist so much for our true frontline colleagues who are serving customers. And I think there's so many examples that many HRDs could give where the technology alone doesn't fix those pain points. In some instances, it makes it worse, it makes it harder, and actually turning it on its head and having transformation driving out organizational pain points to really, really, really optimize the digital investment is what we need, what HR functions need to do.
Right, because I imagine in somewhere like Sainsbury's, I don't know how many people need to be recruited annually to just to stand still, but the slickness of that onboarding process presumably is critical. Absolutely. To keeping the customer experience going.
Yeah, I think what it is. I mean, Sainsbury's can recruit up to 70,000 people a year just to manage attrition, and that's without the Christmas increase as well. And all retailers are the same. It's a transient workforce, and this the actual investment in that it's been good, right? And and the system does to a certain degree what it needs to. There's a lot more digital advancement that has been going on in Sainsbury's recently to make it much more technology enabled for managers at the front end, using their phones, do it all straight through. However, really the thing that I think is the pertinent thing going into the next year, or certainly is already, is what is that experience? How do people feel about that organization through that technology experience? How much does it really bring, what impact does it have on people? Because we know that's what's driving, to your earlier point, what's driving people to vote with their feet, isn't it? And go,
yes. And whereas this, 2 years ago, pre-COVID, etc., this was an issue which could readily be ignored by most boards. What I'm seeing as a change is that the cost of people, the shortage of skills, both high skilled and also specialist skills. We've all seen the HGV drivers and the fulfillment issues around that, and it's across the board that actually there's a recognition that the way we manage and support colleagues actually matters more now than it ever has before in this period of increased cost and also shortages of the critical skills.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And most HR functions during 2021, you saw directors of experience or experience roles pop up everywhere, but I don't think yet the function as, and I know I'm talking really broad brush here, but my experience is that we haven't really worked out what that means in the same way that we have for a customer. So, you know, what does an experience need to be that will keep people in an organization, that or will, you know, motivate, reward, develop, all those things I think the HR functions are grappling with right now.
Yes, but I do see, you know, whilst I see that it's very important, I do also think the answer's becoming clearer as well. The kind of digital transformation we're seeing in a fulfillment at places like Argos and the other big retailers, and of complicated goods, because, you know, I don't know what Argos's list of products are, but I imagine it's in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands. So complicated fulfillment challenges. Whilst in the back office and in HR, that's where the lessons need to be learned. We need the same experience as we are providing to our customers, etc., and the digitalization of that being used to describe how to, and used as the rules for the digital transformation of the back office.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I, you know, I do think, and this is what excites me about the role at Alight, and, you know, working with people like yourselves, is that actually I think that really bold agenda that businesses are having to deal with, and how HR functions are leaner, they're having to do so much more with less, constantly strip cost out, that the ability to have the time, capability and capacity to think about this stuff is so much more limited. So you know, working with our clients and how we can support them with the technology knowledge that Alight's got, with, you know, the skills and experience that people like yourselves have got, Tom, is and I think you said the words the other day, didn't you, that our people in businesses or HR functions are working that out, that they need that support and expertise.
I think so, but I think that, you know, there are other changes I'm seeing which we're also picking up from customer experience. You've described a situation where my customer experience in visiting Sainsbury's or other retail things could change week from week. So I go in one week and there's no mincemeat on in the jars, and then the next week there is, and the bakery section grows and they're off. You know, so the experience I get from my retail experience as a customer changes every week, every month, and I love it. Whereas in my back office experience, we look for things which are going to stay the same year after year. You know, what are the rules for onboarding a person? Great, now we know what they are. That's what we'll apply for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
And this is a load of old codswallop.
It's so much less dynamic. Yeah.
Yes, because actually things are changing month by month about how to recruit people, where to source them, how to support our colleagues, and do that. And yet we still have systems which are really static and not digitalized. I don't know what the new year is going to bring, but I know that it's going to change the pressures on many colleagues working within their businesses. And to not have digitalized systems which allow things to change, etc., seems to me to be dangerous for those companies who want to retain competitive advantage and also colleague advantage.
Yeah, I completely agree. And if you think what's the big lessons of the pandemic have been, you know, the ability for organizations to pause and pivot quickly, be agile, make quick decisions, move quickly, meet consumer needs. You know, everybody front and back need to be able to replicate that behavior, don't they, for whoever their customers are, whether they're colleagues, line managers, you know, retail customers. We all need to have that same capability and mindset.
Totally. I can see that the last couple of years has been fulfilling the customer's needs, etc. Let's make the new year into looking at colleagues' experience and the work around making and protecting and supporting our colleagues. I'd love to put that as a New Year message for everyone on the call. So, Chloe, thank you very much for joining us today. That was really useful. It was great to hear from you and all that insight from retail. We don't do much on retail, so it's really exciting to hear that. So thank you.
No, my pleasure.
And then what I wanted to tell everyone else is that next year this is the last event this year. Next year, we're going to be launching our new monthly series, Mind the Gap, in January. We've been talking about Mind the Gap for a while, but in the context of digital transformation and narrowing that gap between the kind of vision which Chloe's been talking about and what we're actually delivering. So how do we learn from leaders and thinkers and HRDs and finance directors? How do we learn at the front end? How do we learn from them how to narrow that gap between where we want to be on the digital experience and colleague experience and where we actually are? And so that's what we're going to be working on in our events next week. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today and taking time out of your day. I hope it was as useful for you as it was for me. And I'd like to wish you all a happy and healthy Christmas and New Year. So thanks a lot. Have a great rest of the day. And thanks again, Chloe.
Thank you, Tom. Hope you have a good Christmas shop.
Yeah, I've left it late this year. Happy Christmas, everyone.
Happy Christmas.